In a retreat setting like this, you have all the usual experiences of life: eating, sleeping, waking up, taking a shower, walking, sitting, thoughts, emotions. And then you have a whole range of unusual experiences that don't tend to come day to day for most people. For some of us, we never actually leave retreat, so it's kind of happening all the time. But the range of experience, the bandwidth of what is possible, how we experience ourselves, how we experience the world, how we experience the senses, um, is really expanded in retreat often. So we can um, struggle a bit with how to navigate that, what to do with it. We may feel like we know what our practice is or our meditation style or inquiry method outside of retreat. And then we come to retreat and things just don't look or feel the same at all about anything. Reality starts to unwind itself. And so it can be hard to even know where to put your attention or what to do or not to do. Or when the sense of identity starts to unravel, that's a whole different experience. Um, you can start to feel very ungrounded even. Um, so I always like to give at least one talk during a retreat about all the various experiences you can have and just some suggestions um, about how to navigate them. But the overarching suggestion is really trust the experience. It may be beyond your ego boundaries, beyond what you think you can handle or what you think you can experience. And in one sense, it is, but it's also okay. That's what you're here for. And sometimes expansion feels wonderful, peaceful, and sometimes it feels like it's like everything's coming apart. And either way, it's okay. So, one category of experience that we will always come into contact with, navigate during retreat will be emotional experiences. And all emotional experiences exist somewhere on a spectrum, or maybe multiple places on the same spectrum. But um, there's a core experience in any emotional experience that is pure sensation. Certain emotions tend to be seemingly localized into certain parts of the body, but it's a little different for everyone. A lot of people feel sadness or even love, affection in the heart space, but it's not the same for everyone. A lot of people feel anxiety, or when things get really almost like panicky, they feel it in their throat or their neck, but it's not the same for everyone. Fear is felt in different places, and fear has different qualities. There's a sort of background fear that's a little bit more like distrust of yourself or experience. Then there are more hot versions of fear. And there's a very deep, visceral, existential fear that can come as well. So all of these are fine. They're all normal in this setting. Um, so whatever comes is fine. It's okay. It's natural, organic. and it will pass, because everything does. So there is always a sensory component to emotion, pure sensory experience. And what's interesting about the sense field in regard to emotion, or I might say like a sensory map of an emotional landscape that is associated with the body, is that we can have similar types of sensations when the conditions are not there for a particular type of emotion, and it's very easy for us to feel. It's simple. It's not a big deal. But when we have the conditions arise for a certain type of emotion that um, is uncomfortable, or even more, is repressed or has been avoided for years or decades, it can be surprising how difficult it is to actually feel directly into that body sense. And that's okay as well, but you may notice it. So, what often comes with emotion is some degree of resistance. It doesn't always, but the really contracted, heavy emotions that we feel like we're struggling with. Um, when we say I'm in a lot of pain, but we don't mean necessarily physical pain, emotional pain. It's often the signature of resistance. There's some resistance around. So that's another component of emotional experience that we'll notice at various times during retreat. Something that feels like a kind of resistance intertwined with an emotional experience. Some of us are more inclined to resist sadness or grief. Some of us are more inclined to resist fear. And some of us are more inclined to resist anger. But really, underneath all of those resistance patterns, there's a kind of psychological fear, just the fear of life, fear of being a human in this life, fear of not knowing, fear of not knowing enough, fear of not being seen, fear of not being loved, fear of not belonging, fear of loss, fear of ill health, fear of being judged. It's just this kind of blanket psychological fear we have underneath, and that is directly associated with mind identification, the fundamental delusions that we're directly addressing in this kind of a setting. So when you find resistance, you'll often find this fear as well. And the nice thing about this is you can address it or um, investigate it through belief. Anytime there's emotional resistance, there's a belief somewhere about it, or actually usually more than one, a collection of beliefs about what you're feeling and what its implications are. So if it's a pure emotion, pure experience of sadness or grief, and you're crying and letting go and you feel release, and there's nothing that's really trying to hold it back or struggling with it, that's great. There's nothing to do about that. If, on the other hand, you feel struggle intertwined with it, uh, or a wall, or feel like something's pushing it, or you're pushing it away, or you're feeling it, but there's something that's just like there's something not right about this. I'm judging myself, trying to make distance from it, and then I feel it, and then I make distance. If any of those are happening, you can bet that there's at least one belief that's operating in the background. So it can be helpful in these moments, these experiences of resistance to emotion, struggle with emotion, or emotional pain. It can be helpful to just ask yourself, what beliefs are running in the background? Or what are my beliefs about this emotion or this experience or even this story? Because the emotions often will there's a lot of repression or resistance, they often will be associated with an ongoing narrative in our life. Could have been going since childhood, often is. Um, so often the narrative itself can kind of um, give you clues to the beliefs that are there. And there's the belief that this is a true story about me, right? The narrative is true. That's a belief. And you kind of get at that, as we talked about yesterday. You get at the sort of the fundamental belief about time, about the narrative of me and my life and story, through awakening, through direct insight. But when we're talking about emotion in real time, as we are now, to just kind of wholesale disregard your whole narrative isn't really helpful usually. So to just tell yourself, well, there's no one here, and I know that I'm no one, and I know that there's no self, or that doesn't really work here usually. Rather, that can actually be a way of bypassing. So instead, look for the specific beliefs about the emotional experience. And they may be implicit in some of the narrative for sure. But often they're just kind of hidden in the background. It's a feel, like you can feel something there. Um, so you can ask, what are these beliefs? What are the beliefs about the emotion I'm experiencing right now? What are my beliefs about the resistance to that emotion? You could even say to yourself, what is suggested in the way I'm thinking about this, the way I'm processing this right now, to reveal beliefs. And then you could also ask the emotion, or empathize with the emotion itself, the energetics of it, and ask, how does this emotion see the world? Or how does this emotional experience see the world? What does it want? What does it believe? What does it think it needs? What does it think is true about the world or itself? So all of these are ways of getting at it. Just unwinding things a bit so that the beliefs become obvious. Common beliefs that you may find. You may find other ones, of course, but beliefs you may find are things like, I can't handle this. That's a big one. I can't handle this is often sort of buried in our reaction. It's buried in our reaction to the thoughts about the situation, but it happens very fast, so we can overlook that. So it may be just a sort of background glimmer of thought, but if you really look and see, oh, okay, there is something there that says I can't handle this. If you find that, just return your attention to the experience, the visceral, the body, the sensation field, and test whether it's true that you can't handle it, because it's there right now. It's doing okay. You're doing okay. So you have the capacity for it, but you can't just sort of believe that. You have to keep checking in with it and noticing the thought, noticing the belief, checking back in, because it's a pretty deeply rooted belief. You can't just dispel it intellectually by seeing it once. You may have to go back multiple times. Be gentle with yourself. Don't add judgment to all of this. We'll talk about judgment as well. Um, Look at it as a sort of empirical or scientific investigation, or just a contemplation with curiosity and heart. And you can break it down a little bit. Like, do I need to handle this? Is this something that's in the realm of handling, or is it just an experience that's happening? that has nothing to do with whether I can handle it or not. It's like, can you handle the wind? It's just there. It's just noticed. And our internal experiences are something like that as well, kind of like weather patterns. But that background stuck belief that we're reacting to without remembering, because we've been doing it for so many years, that says I can't handle it, it feels like division. It feels like a rift in experience. It feels like a holding pattern. It feels like a holding back from experience and keeping it at arm's length. But it's very simple. It's a very small thing. But if you don't see it clearly, it'll just kind of remain there often. We could do a whole 1 hour talk on the belief, I can't handle this. Because if you really dispel that again and again, just by examining it again and again, in different emotional spaces, by the way, you may have a different form of it in a space where you're resisting fear or you're resisting, grief. It may feel different, but still at the root, you may find that same sort of experience, something that just says, this is too much. I can't handle it. Keep investigating it, and it may soften a lot. And then the feeling that there's something between a me that's aware, a me that's conscious, a me that's me, and whatever it is I think I have to hold back or I can't handle, the space between them starts to dissolve. And then the whole idea of management and handling vaporizes. It's just not something that even comes up. It doesn't come up mentally, and it doesn't come up experientially. When there's non-division, when there's true non-division, it's not much to say anymore. There's not much to do anymore, but it also feels rather unified, natural, simple. So anytime you feel struggle, division, resistance, or a feeling or even belief that says, I can't handle this, this is too much, that's good. That's good that you're noticing it. If you don't notice it, that's when we stay unconscious. That's when trouble starts. And we exhaust ourselves trying to maintain that illusion for ourselves and others. A lot of times others can see it and you can't, be willing to take that reflection, because it's just momentum. We have momentum of repressing certain things or avoiding certain things, and it feels like us. And to the degree that there's identity that wants to preserve itself, preserve its ego boundaries, preserve its own boundaries, it can try to defend that for no reason at all. And the only result of that is you struggle and you feel suffering. But really, what this is about is just finding apparent boundaries and looking close enough until you see that they're not there. And those often come in the form of beliefs, or the belief is associated very intimately with the apparent boundary. This is a bit of an aside, but I think it's relevant to many people. The doctrine of non-duality, the doctrine of non-dual, which hopefully for those who wrote the doctrine or talk about it have realized it. So it's not just a doctrine, it's not just a concept, it's a realization about the nature of reality, which is all of our reality. That can seem how do I say it? I don't know if there's a word for this. We have to make up a new word. It can seem rather impersonal, maybe, in a sense. Interesting, enticing, cosmic in a way, but not a personal thing. But the interesting thing I found just through experience, seeing people, working with people go through this stuff, is that often aspects of the personal spectrum, the emotion spectrum, repression, things like that, are what actually filter or circumvent your ability to realize the non-dual aspect of reality. Because when it's realized, it's so simple. It's stupid simple, like so obvious, so clear. It's also wonderful. And it's a big relief because you don't have to do anything anymore. Um, so I just want to put that out there because some people have a certain way of, I don't know, intellectualizing it too much, almost romanticizing non-dual, but they're not. There's still something they're not wanting to feel and hear. There's something they're not wanting to navigate in their own emotion body, and it will not be clear until that happens. It won't be clear experientially. So I'll just put that out there. So this deep emotion work is very important, no matter how you're hooked up. Even if you're an overtly emotional person where you express emotionally expressive, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're not emotionally expressive, but you do feel emotion deeply. And there are people like that for sure. Many people. Many people feel emotion deeply. They just don't express it outwardly. And that doesn't mean they're repressed. It just means that's how they express. But in either case, there can be emotional repression. You can be the most emotionally demonstrative person in the world and still be very repressed. And vice versa. You may not express a lot of emotion, but you may be deeply emotionally intact and articulate. We have our persona, how we outwardly express toward others, is not necessarily the same. Um, what's not the same aspect of us as our deep inner emotional world. Um, so, regardless of how emotion sounds to you, how important it feels to you, how demonstrative you are with emotion, or how reserved you are with expressing emotion, this journey through the emotion body is critical to clarify, integrate, and deepen realization. How you approach it in real time will vary. But as I mentioned, a lot of it is about feeling directly, sensation, exploration of the sensation in its purity. And a lot of it is actually about looking at beliefs. It's very important to not overlook either aspect. There's nothing fixated in sensation ever. There's nothing fixated in the visual experience ever. There's nothing fixated in sound ever. There's nothing fixated in taste, smell. The only fixations really arise through belief and through reaction to belief and through the fundamental experience of anything being separate in such a way that you could react to it. And that's all essentially in consciousness. So this is why I point to consciousness a lot, because that's where the fixations reside. To even say they reside there is not quite right, because you're not going to actually find a fixation, but that somehow the mechanism of consciousness allows us to feel separate in various ways. And the feeling of being separate out here with other people and relationship and life, separate from objects, when we talk about non-dual, those are all secondary. They're secondary experiences of separation. The primary experience of separation is internal, and we have direct access to it. It's personal in a sense. It's hyper personal. It's right where you are. That's why you can always find the answer by going inward. You can always find the answer by slowing down the mind. You can always find the answer by not distracting yourself. You can always find the answer by coming into an environment like this and turning attention inward. Because all the fixations you're going to find, they're going to be there. All the beliefs you're going to find are going to be there. And at some point, fixations, perceptions just dissolve again and again and again. And that will go on probably for the rest of your life. But as far as identity is concerned, there are very specific and important um, perceptual filters or perceptual distortions to address when we talk about realization. Another common belief, I think, about emotion that's fixating that you can investigate. One, as I mentioned and talked about a bit, that is, I don't have the capacity for this, or I can't handle it. It's too much. There's another one that often comes with it, um, and it's something like a fear that this will keep going. It's like a fear that this won't stop. How long? I can only handle this for so long, right? Like if I feel pain, what if this pain goes on till for an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, tomorrow, 3 weeks from now? And then we start thinking about all the things we won't be able to do and how it's going to hinder us. And we won't, it's another version of I can't handle it, but it sort of puts it in time. And if there's a, if there's a true demon that the consciousness can construct or the ego construct, it's time. Time is brutal when you believe in it. It's, you know, it's very easy to dispel that, but it's also very easy to get caught up in it. Um, the 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 fundamental belief there that is overlooked when we concern ourselves with, well, what if this keeps going? What if this lasts longer? What if this lasts forever? What if it gets worse? The fundamental belief we're not looking at is that that you're doing anything about it now. You're managing anything about it now. You're not. It's just there. And also trying to plan trying to plan resistance. So it requires enough effort to make resistance appear now. It requires a lot of effort. You could maybe say that that's a blessing because that's the feeling of suffering. So it requires a lot of effort to try to resist because how do you resist when there's no boundaries? So we have to construct artificial boundaries and keep reminding ourselves of that, and then using other people to go into complicity. It's a whole project, right? And it takes a lot of effort, a lot of mental energy. So if it takes that much effort to do that right now, how much effort do you think it takes to plan how you're going to resist experience for the next rest of your life? That's really a daunting task. It's very intimidating. So that's kind of how I think those beliefs around experience are hooked up. There's the fundamental belief that, like, not fundamental, but it's a kind of deeply hidden belief that I can't handle this. And if we're afraid of that, then we push that away. We kind of disassociate from that belief. We don't even realize that's what we're afraid of. But hopefully, as I mentioned, we come into contact with it and test that belief. I can't handle this. Then, well, God, not only can I not handle it now, I have to handle it, in an hour from now and 2 hours from now and tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And then I won't be able to go to work. And then, right? That's brutal. It's a very uncomfortable mind space. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's also sucks when you're in it, when you're caught up in it and it feels so real, right? So just test that belief. Does anything go on and on forever? Nothing does. Things change all the time. All the time. And more importantly than that, things do change all the time, and it's unpredictable when they will. But not only that, you can't manage anything in the future. You just can't do it. You never have, you never will. You can't touch anything in the future because you're making it up as you go along. So you can't manage anything in the future. So don't give yourself that burden. It's a waste of time at best. It's a huge energy sink, and it's just struggle that you're the only one suffering from it. I mean, there's really, that's not true. There's so many of us in the world suffering from it that through complicity and subliminal communication, we kind of make each other suffer even more. And it can amplify in certain environments when there's fear and so forth. It can amplify to the point where there's overt violence going on, right? We see it throughout the world. But you can always break that spell in yourself. You can't do it for anyone else, but you can do it for yourself. So those are good beliefs to investigate when it comes to intense experiences, uncomfortable experiences, or sometimes they're not even that intense, really. Sometimes they're not even that uncomfortable. We're just habituated to say no at a certain set of conditions in life. Could be anything. Could be when we lose validation in some way. It could be when we feel a little sick. It could be anything. And just because of habit, we just say, no, this is the part of life where I just start resisting and feeling a lot of struggle. Look into it. Do you have to? Do you have, what are the beliefs there? Let's look. And sometimes you just look right at these beliefs, you see them, and it's almost laughable and it just releases. Other times it may take a little more, it takes as long as it takes, but other times it may take a little more investigation, inquiry. But I would work in that way with emotions generally if they feel fixated or heavy or stuck or something just instinctually tells you to work deeper with an emotional experience that comes up during retreat. As I said, some emotional experiences will feel rather rather overtaking of you, but there's no problem. You don't feel like there's any issue with it. It's just something moving through like a weather pattern. And those often do move through rather quickly when they just feel like there's no resistance, just a wave of sadness comes through or a wave of fear comes through. It can happen. Some of the kinds of pointing I do in the guided meditations or even the talks um, can, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, can lead to experiences of a sort of infinite expansion where there's no where to rest anything. There's no orientation anymore. Um, and if that happens, like I said, it can be somewhat dysregulating or um, disorienting, I should say. It just can be rather disorienting. Um, and that's okay if that happens. That also tends to come and go, tends to come and pass, can last a while for sure. And so yeah, if you feel that it's just so much, too much, overwhelming, overtaking, disorienting, um, first of all, it's a good thing because it's showing that your ego boundaries are like popping, breaking down, dissolving, or you're seeing that they were never there. That's good. But it can be a lot, that experience. So if you feel really, um, disoriented or just gone in some way that's uncomfortable or really, really confusing, um, then there are always ways to do sort of grounding exercises. And as realization deepens, many people do have a lot of energetics like this. But strangely, you get used to it. But you get used to it not because you stand apart from it, yet you get used to it just by being absorbed into it so many times that, I don't know, the body mind just knows how to function even though that's happening. Um, but you do learn that certain grounding exercises can be very helpful. And knowing which ones work for you can be skillful. So I recommend exploring this if you really do get that experience of just everything's gone, completely dissolved. I don't even know if I'm walking across the room or sitting in a chair anymore. No sense of ego boundaries. That can happen in these situations, these retreats. So if you get that, just work with some of these suggestions and see what helps for you. Um, one is just super simple, and it's just physical contact. So physical contact with any object. Just touch, feel, and put your attention in the sensation itself. And even though, in one sense, sensations are also non-dual, they're also um, they're not actually there in one sense. There's something about physical sensation that is maybe it's our wiring to be physically associated with what appears to be a body in an apparent world. So there's something about physical touch that actually grounds, and with the hands and the feet. So just put your attention in the sensations of contact with anything, even your own body. The floor is helpful to ground. It's cold outside. It's probably not time to walk barefoot through the grass, but even the floor, I mean, it's a lot of mass and energy I mean, everybody knows, right? This special theory of relativity and energy and mass are in continuum, actually. Mass is energy. It's just very densely packed energy in one way of speaking. Um, so when there's release of energy in the body, release of energy because we start to destroy ego boundaries and so forth, that's exactly what happens. Literally releases energy. And if this sounds like, hoo-hoo to you because you're scientific, just wait. It'll happen. And then you'll be like, oh, shit. It does happen. It's, and so you might find these intense releases of energy. One simple way of saying it is that energy is trying to find ground. And the biggest mass you're anywhere in our vicinity is the earth, physical, everything in contact with the earth, the ground, the floor. So yeah, lay down on the floor, feel it, feel all your contact points with the floor. Just feel everything touching, just the sensations. It's very grounding. There's no story there. There's nothing to learn, think about, understand, but it's grounded, simple, solid, and tactile and comforting, or at least it can calm that sense of just being blown out into nothingness. So that's one strategy, and it's very effective, I think, for the most part. Um, Even when you're walking too, like you get used to laying down, feeling that contact, all those contact points, the sensation, tuning into it. And then when you get up to walk, every time you put your foot down, feel it. How often do we mindfully step? Like how often do you notice every single physical contact point of your foot? I don't mean walking across the room going, I know I'm walking. I mean literally feeling sensation. How does it feel when your foot touches the carpet again and again and again? That can keep you grounded. And sometimes you have to do that in these cases. So that's another way is just remain in contact with the earth. You kind of always are, but mindfully, point by point. Um, if you have a lot of intense, like Kundalini type energy up in the head or moving through the body, up and down the spine, any of that, you can also use a technique like this. There are different ways of talking about it. One Zen master called it I think he called it the golden butter technique or something. It's like you imagine golden butter on top of your head melting very slowly, like a very thick, viscous liquid. And this works for me when it doesn't happen so much now, but for years I had a lot of energy in the head, headaches all the time. I didn't really realize what it was, but as I started to learn and do this, it worked really well. And you kind of imagine like a golden liquid moving down your body, but it's a visual thing, but it's also a sensation. You have to kind of incorporate the sensation of your head, the back of your head, your neck, your spine, slow, just like a really slow visceral movement, dripping downward like golden liquid all the way down your spine. And you can go through like the chair, down the legs into the floor, but just a slow movement. And it actually does help guide that energy downward, because when there's a lot of thought energy, a lot of cognitive energy, and then that's sort of pure consciousness, it really can release a lot of energy in your head. It can feel like headaches, pressure, just like a lot. It can really help guide that down through just that visualization and turn the visualization into a sensation, movement down your body into the ground slowly. You can also invite the earth to help you regulate it as you're doing this, like as you're in physical contact. I know that can sound hokey or whatever, but try it. Invite the earth, like just, can you help me regulate this energy? And it works. So any of the senses can work. The physical touch is very good, especially when it comes to physical objects, solid things, the earth itself. I had a friend who had, okay, I had a friend who had a series of really, really profound awakenings with no knowledge of what even happened. This wasn't a spiritual person at all, and it was very, very, very disorienting, to say the least, for many years. But one thing that they learned to do was work with clay. Hands on clay was the way to ground, and they did it for years. Makes sense, you know. And then movement. Well, other senses like taste. So tasting the tea. Thich Nhat Hanh has a beautiful video where he talks about tasting tea. and feeling the warmth of the cup in your hands, the warmth and the taste. That will ground you. It's very grounding. It's really wonderful. It's a wonderful meditation, but it's not a expansive, ego obliterating meditation. It's just simple and direct. Probably everyone should do this through retreat, And the tea's so good. Close your eyes when you taste. Try it. Also, movement may help. There's a line there. If you're too vigorous with movement, shaking, things like that, it can actually activate energy, kundalini, things like that. So if you're the kind of person that gets a lot of kundalini type energy releases and shifts and all that, you'll learn this. You'll learn what works for you and what doesn't. So maybe slow movement, slow intuitive movement on the floor, laying down, sitting down, or standing, moving slowly. Anything really vigorous can potentially sort of exacerbate it, but you'll know that. Trembling, TRE, shaking type movements in small amounts can probably be helpful if you do them regularly, but just especially if there's a lot of energy moving through, just do them in small amounts and make sure it's not activating it. But it can help you it can help your body know how to manage and or release energies in a more regulated way, in a more proactive way. And then, as I said at the beginning, if things just get so weird and disorienting, it's hard to even be in silence and meditation and listening. You can always take a round off or take 2 rounds off. It's okay if it's just too much, and it can be, silence over and over and over and over. Sometimes it just gets more and more and more disassociated or disorganized or whatever in the conscious space. And also know over time, the whole system just learns how to navigate it, I suppose, and that profound expansion starts to become rather natural and not dysphoric, not confusing, and not disorienting, but just this. Also, this may or may not be helpful, but I'm sure someone out there it would be helpful. If you're feeling really, really hot emotions like rage, or even perhaps a kind of restlessness that's very hot, like really hard to, you don't know what to do with it, but you feel like you need to do something with it. That's when movement also can be really helpful. But also at the same time, grounding, this physical grounding can be helpful if you're kind of in that orientation of asking the earth to help you regulate, that energy, because it can be really intense, hot energy. And maybe some combination of just laying there and shaking a little bit, feeling the ground, feeling those contact points, asking the earth to help you just naturally regulate all that energy. Combination of that and maybe movement. Movement can be helpful. Sometimes even if it's like a really hot like a really hot emotional experience like anger, then movement, even more vigorous movement, can be really helpful. Potentially, just let your body move how it wants to. It's a feeling of wanting to express something, but it doesn't know how. But it's very physical, so let it express. So intuitive movement can be really helpful for those kinds of pent up, intense emotions as well.